Right, hold on. Hi, Aaron. I'm going to just wait for Andrew. So now we're looking at the rates issues. And we have, as we have seen before, Andrew and Aaron. Welcome, gentlemen. Over to you.
Good morning. This report recommends you adopt the rates issues that were consulted on as part of the budget for this year. Primary issue is a proposal to provide a new rates postponement scheme to assist ratepayers who might be struggling as a result of the impact of COVID-19. It also allows business ratepayers to apply for postponement, which our current scheme didn't allow for. There's a couple of minor technical changes to the draft policy being proposed. This is very well supported in the consultation and by all the local boards. The report also notes the postponement fee that's been proposed. The second issue is the suspension of the accommodation provider targeted rate for a year, alongside an adjustment to our spending over the next 12 months. And the reduced rate will only be payable in the fourth quarter of the financial year. So it'll be the May invoice. This proposal was also very well supported in consultation and supported by the local boards. The report is also seeking and recommending the adoption of decisions that were made in principle in May to increase the base waste management targeted rate and the refuse targeted rate in the Auckland City and Manukau City areas, to adopt the Central Park Henderson bid proposal, and to cease from the 1st of July next year the Waitakere Ranges septic tank pump out targeted rate in the Upper Harbour local board area. These proposals were all supported in the consultation on the budget this year, and in particular there was strong support for the adjustments to our. There's a minor editorial error, I also note, in the 7th bullet point on page 60, in paragraph 60 of the report, where we've incorrectly included the rate for this year in a reference to next year's rate, and there'll be a note to the minutes recording that. So it's not in the resolutions. It's just a comment in the report. It's referring to decisions that have already been made. So you've already made a number of rates decisions this year, and they're listed in paragraph 60 of the report. The changes to rates this year will be communicated by the council to ratepayers, and in particular there will be reference in the insert that goes alongside the rates invoice to the new postponement scheme and to the introduction of the swimming pool targeted rate. Those who will be paying the swimming pool targeted rate will receive a letter from the council in addition to this, and we'll be emailing all the people who deferred their rates in May, advising them of what the next steps are for them to pay those by the 30th of August, and pointing out to them the new postponement scheme and their eligibility for that. The council's rates insert also, and rates invoice also, makes clear to people all the options for council assistance and support in paying their rates. We've got our communications will be going out on the rates rebate, and all this information will be made available to our community partners, including the Citizens Advice Bureaus, the budgeting services and work and income. Happy to answer any questions.
Right, questions, councillors? I have Councillor Walker.
Questions. Certainly agree with cancelling out the accommodation targeted rate. From the information that ATED gave us, it's clear that that's going to be a longer term proposition because of the ongoing impacts of COVID. So I just wanted to signal that, and I make the assumption you're aware of that and forecasting out in the long-term plan around that. So that's one question. And the other question really just goes to the postponement policy, which is an incredibly good deal. My question is around how we promote that, because it's far more attractive than what Heartland Finance promote. For example, the administration costs are low, and it's a very genuine way that we can assist people. So my concern, Madam Chair, is how we can more adequately promote some of these really good things that we do.
So our longer term postponement scheme is promoted. So it's something that our team, our customer services representatives and people, when they're ringing up about their rates, they have got some issues, they're being advised of that. And it's also advised to our community partners, so that if people are approaching them about the rates, they can advise them of these options. So it's certainly something that, as you point out, we promote with the community.
So every ratepayer will get notification around it, and then I think we'll get a copy of that as well. And I think we play a big role here, Councillor. You make a very, very good point. We play a very good role. We've all got residents' associations within our wards. We've also got key stakeholder groups within our wards, and I think we can play a role in absolutely, should this be successful, publishing and marketing that. Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. It was just in E7, as we said, there'll be no change to the increase, no major change to the targeted rate for the pump out scheme when the contract is it's basically a new contract because it's a different area. But you did say there will be just a $3 increase this year for the Waitakere Ranges local board area, just as an adjustment. Is that right?
Yes, so the increase for this year, I think it goes from $198 to $201, or
yep.
$200.91.
So it's $3 for the year, and then it'll be in the next annual plan, once we've gone out to contract, then there'll be a new cost.
Yeah, the new rate will be set at that time. And
we don't know that yet, of course.
We don't know that. The contract's still being worked on, and that new rate will form part of the draft long-term plan that goes out for consultation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and that kind of answers the question I was just about to ask, but I'll ask it anyway in case there's anything missing. Could you briefly outline the process from here for Waitakere Ranges residents on the next steps for the setting of that future rate for the pump out scheme?
So when our Healthy Waters team have completed their contract negotiations, that will establish the cost that's going to be incurred in providing that service in the Waitakere Ranges local board area to those residents who are part of the scheme. You will then see that in December as part of the consultation materials for the long-term plan 2021 to 31, and that will go out for consultation, as all our rates do, and they'll have an opportunity to respond to that again through that process. It's likely to be a bit more, but still quite reasonable in relation to what you or I might pay for our urban wastewater services, and we'll go through the normal rates process.
Yes, Councillor Fletcher, can you hear us?
Yes, Madam Chair, I can. My question to Andrew is that prior to COVID-19 and the decision to have an emergency budget, were officers looking at a retreat from the targeted accommodation rate?
The Council hadn't asked us to look at the accommodation provider targeted rate for this financial year at that time, so we weren't investigating it.
All right, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I now invite you for comment. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And I just want to briefly speak to the Henderson bid targeted rate. Firstly, to offer my congratulations to Gary, Kelvin, Tim Livingston, the board, those in the business community that have been involved in the past as well, because this has been a dream for that town for a very long time. This vote is years in the making, and as local board chair, I did my bit. I worked with the community, business community, to help get us to this point as well. And I think it's a great source of pride for many in that community. This will provide a strong and an independent voice for Henderson business. It will hold to account the local board, the council, central government, everyone connected to the business community, and they will be fierce promoters of our wonderful town centre in Henderson. This vote will give the tools that Henderson needs to actually get ahead. Henderson's future is bright. It will involve a stronger business community and a safer town centre. It will be more connected. It will be better able to facilitate residents into that town centre. This motion will set Henderson Town on a path to progress that is meaningful, actually, not just to Henderson, but to all West Aucklanders that feel it in their hearts. I thank all of those that have worked on this proposal. I look forward to voting on it, and I thank my colleagues for making this happen as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Councillor Mulholland.
Just a note, when I worked at Waitakere City Council, that I was involved in trying to establish the Henderson bid. I want to be very clear on that so that people are clear on my position, that I did work for council and I was employed in part to run bids, and that was one we attempted to establish. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I support everything that Councillor Henderson has said, of course, and also acknowledge Councillor Mulholland's efforts in the past with a group of people at Waitakere. It's been more than 15 years in the making, this, and to get it over the line is just extraordinary. It's one of the few towns that's a metro centre that doesn't have a bid. So I really appreciate my fellow councillors' support on this. We all do. Kia ora.
Thank you. Any other comments? Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to make a comment, and this is our way of showing Auckland that we are able to help those who are struggling to pay their rates. We already had a scheme, but this is a second scheme. So I think we had a bit of an idea about how that was going to go with the last quarter of what is last year. Actually, we're already in the new year, aren't we? And I think we'll find, we know we've got a 65 million, is it 65 million now, pot available for this, and we will be keeping a very watchful eye on it. But I think at the end of the day, one of the things that you can talk to your community is about the fact that we have made a special new provision for those who have been impacted as ratepayers as a result of COVID-19, both business and residential. So Shane, would you like to move this? Yeah. And look, you know, hasn't got everything in it that I like, as you know. You don't win all your wars, do you? But at the end of the day, I believe in democracy. So, got a mover and a seconder. All those in... Sorry. Oh, you can second. I'm happy. Okay, well, you can second, Councillor. I'm happy for you to do that. All right? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Right, now, thank you, and thank you very much, gentlemen. Now, we've still got these sound issues, haven't we? So I'm sorry, I'm going to break till 12:30. Do you think we'll be ready by then? We'll try for 12:30, sorry, and then we come back and do the big budget. To remind you that we are considering items 11 and 12 together. So I welcome to the floor, to the table, Ross. No, I don't. Yes, I do. Ross, Michael, and John. Three men that we've got to know very, very well over the last few weeks. So, gentlemen, over to you, please.
Thank you. So we've we've discussed the budget, all the components, through many hours of workshops. So we'll keep this reasonably brief and just sort of a few slides to just kind of step through the key elements of the process and how the numbers have moved and shaped up, including over the last few days. So just a recap in terms of where we've come from in terms of the annual budget for next year, or for the current financial year, 2021. We went out and consulted in February, March on the initial draft budget. It was minimal change. There wasn't a lot going on there. It was very much a business as usual budget. But before we even got to the end of that consultation process, the world changed. The COVID situation came along. So after that, we went through and looked at what is the impact of COVID-19 on the council group's finances for the coming year. We worked with our chief economist to come up with some assumptions and scenarios, and worked with across the group with all the CCOs, figure out, well, what is the impact? What is the direct impacts, the knock-on impacts on revenues, costs, capital expenditure? And then looked for savings. So looked for where we could defer capital investment, cut back on non-essential spending. And so as part of that process, we identified 120 million of savings for the council parent and a further 38 million for the CCOs. But it wasn't enough. When we ran the numbers on all that, we had our debt to revenue ratio above our 270% limit. In fact, it was well up above 300%, and it was predicted to stay elevated for 4 years above our limit. So that wasn't a prudent financial place to be. So we needed to find further savings, pull further levers in order to put together a prudent, sustainable budget. So the last box there sort of shows how we've moved those levers other than the rates choice. So firstly, borrowing. So we realised we couldn't live at 270% for this particular year. So we proposed increasing the debt to revenue projection up to 290%, so 20% higher than a limit for 1 year, but coming back to the limit of 270 within 12 months. Well, that is as far as we thought we could prudently go, and that still remains the case. Things are still uncertain. The economic outlook is still moving around. You're just going to look at other parts of the world to kind of see what can happen, what changes can happen with the COVID situation, and can happen pretty quickly. So we think 290% is the prudent place to be, and there's a lot of financial risk going anywhere above that. So the other levers we looked at operating costs, and can we find other reductions? So here we're going a bit further than just looking at back office services and finding efficiencies. It's looking at some real cuts to what we do. And it may only need to be temporary, but it's where we start to really make changes to services and pull back on things like parks maintenance. We pull back on public transport services and some of those things. So there's a certain amount we need to do. It was about 50 odd million to get to 3.5, and then even more cuts to services to get down to a 2.5% rates increase. Then we looked at capital expenditure. We'd already factored in some deferrals in an initial position, but we needed to go further and be more aggressive in terms of what we can push out. Looked at what was committed, what's critical for renewals, what are absolute top priorities for the council, and most other things. We asked the question, well, can it be pushed out, and why can't it be pushed out? And we just had to look across the board, across the whole group, everywhere. Generally, it's not expenditure that's been cut, it's just purely a timing matter. But there's a lot of things across the board that are just timing is going to have to be slower because of the situation. So 280 million deferrals at 3.5, but then even more deferrals, more reductions, more things being pushed out to achieve a 2.5% rates increase. And then lastly, we needed to finally bridge that gap and make the numbers work with that debt to revenue ratio. We needed to look at finding how do we get an extra amount of cash, and bringing forward a lot of the asset recycling to set a higher target of 200 million. So increasing the target from 24 million to 224 million, and you've talked about that this morning. So that was the package we went out and consulted on. As you've heard this morning, record numbers of feedback on that. And we've spent lots of time going through, analysing, understanding that feedback. So that's where we were. The report on the agenda today, the budget decision-making report, sets out the history, sets out the updates that we've done. So things have moved on since the draft budget. Things have got slightly better. Working with our chief economist, we've a slight improvement in economic forecasts. We've come out of lockdown earlier than expected. We're expecting to be in the draft budgets maybe at the level 2 through to October or through to September, and then for the rest of the financial year at level 1. But we're now projecting we're at level 1 throughout the whole of the coming year. So coming out of lockdown earlier, better economic projections means a slight improvement in revenue. So 50 million improvement in revenue, some other debt movements and other things. So overall, there's 40 million additional capacity just from refreshing and updating our budgets. So that was extra capacity. That would have been great news if we could reinstate some stuff, but then the water care drought issue came along, and the need to respond to that, and not at the lower end, not at just the more modest investment that might have been the case. Water care advising that with this being a 1 in 200 year drought, and then having reached agreement down the Waikato, they advised that 224 million is the investment they need this year in order to avoid us moving into severe water restrictions. So it's come out 224 million as the extra water care capex required, as well as 15 million of extra OPEX again. So that's the cost to treat the water. So all of that is drought related, an extra challenge. So on top of the revenue shortfall of the order of 500 million, there's a $240 odd million drought challenge as well. But because we've made all those other measures, we've had the asset cycling, capex deferrals, etc., going higher with the debt, we've managed to mitigate a lot of that 500 million revenue, and water care have committed to offsetting about half of the debt issue associated with their investment. So where does that leave us? Overall, that left us with a 78 million shortfall that we need to find in order to balance things at that 290% debt to revenue. And so in the report, we talk about some options to do that, options of looking at further capex deferrals, looking at higher asset sales, and maybe even as a last resort going a little bit higher on debt and accepting the risks that come with that. But luckily, we haven't had to go there. Things have changed in the last few days with a couple of announcements from central government. The first one relating to Waka Kotahi, and that's the New Zealand Transport Agency. So in their agreement to underwrite public transport revenues through to December this year, that creates about that improves the group revenue by about 15 million. And then in terms of leverage you get through our debt to revenue ratio as well, means there's extra capacity for about 55 million in total from that, both in terms of the cash revenue and that debt to revenue leverage. And then, but as part of the other thinking there, that helps us mitigate the debt problem, but there's an opportunity there to reinvest some of that proceeds, some of the debt capacity back into transport, and particularly into the safety program that's been reduced from what was going to be a huge record investment in transport safety, and has been pared back a lot. Even the 3.5 would be further than the 2.5. Because we've had that announcement from Waka Kotahi, we're able to reinstate a package of 40 million of additional transport investment, and about half of that is directly related to transport safety enhancements. We've also had the advice from central government, an indication around the shovel-ready projects. Not the full details, that's still to come, but we have had confirmation that there's 2 lots of 98 million of funding coming to Auckland Council, and that's in 2 parts. The first 98 relates to projects, capital investments that are already funded or fully funded, and the second part is for unfunded projects. The unfunded project doesn't really change our budget picture here. It does help Auckland. It's projects that aren't on our books, so additional investment and additional funding will be added on, but that doesn't really create any capacity for the council to make investment decisions. It's just more projects with government funding. But for the first 98 million, that does help. It isn't quite clear exactly how much of that helps us this financial year. It's still unclear how much of it relates to multi-year projects, how that relates and intersects with what we've currently got in our budget projections. But we're pretty confident that at the very minimum it will displace 30 million of council funding for this financial year. So that's 30 million of capacity it will create. Maybe it creates more capacity. If it does, then that means that it'll take the pressure off debt a little bit, and debt might be a little bit lower. Or maybe it means we can invest a little bit more. So that would be good. But at the moment, we can make a prudent, conservative assumption there about 30 million and these numbers. So putting all that together, that means we're pretty close to making the budget work. There's about a $13 million shortfall. So our suggestion on that, to make it all work, is a 20 million increase in the asset recycling target is all that you would need. And we talked about that this morning. In the consultation, we talked about a 200 million increase. If we made that a 220 million increase, that would basically get us there. It would cover that 13 million gap, provide just a little bit of extra capacity which you could use to repay debt. It's not a huge amount, a few million, but it means that we've balanced, effectively mitigated both the $500 million revenue shortfall and the water care drought issue with this package on the screen here. So this is assuming a 3.5% rates increase. Options slightly different at a 2.5%, but this is what a 3.5% package would do. 3.5% rates increase, 290% debt to revenue limit. Capital investments as per what we've consulted on in the 3.5% scenario, and rather than any additional deferrals, we can actually add back in that 40 million of transport investment. And then no further OPEX cost reductions over and above those in the 3.5% scenario that we consulted on. So that's what the report says, that's the latest information, and that's how the budget is looking at the moment. Happy to take any questions.
So I think at this stage what I might do is go to the Mayor. This is it's our staff recommendations. And now, Your Worship, we'd like to hear what you have to say.
Kia ora, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou. Good afternoon and welcome. I think our finance team at the end of the table and our chair at the top of the table both feel like the marathon runner that's just sees the finishing tape at the end of a couple of hundred metres ahead of them. And I want to acknowledge both our finance team and Desley for huge efforts, and Shane as the deputy chair. But actually I want to acknowledge everybody here, because this has been an effort that we have applied ourselves constructively and collaboratively to. And I think it's the best process I've seen, actually, in my time on council, and others who have been here much longer. Kathy probably thinks that it's the best process we've been through, way beyond that. Late last year, I presented a budget proposal to the governing body, and this proposal doesn't bear much resemblance to it. This is an emergency budget, well named, because we've all been through an experience in recent months that is unprecedented in our lifetimes, the COVID-19 lockdown. And that has had a huge impact on our country. Equally, it's had a huge impact on our city and the revenue of this council. Now, I'm not critical of the way COVID-19 was handled. I looked at the news this morning to find out what was happening in Melbourne. I think 237 new cases of COVID-19, mostly community transmitted. IC units filling up rapidly, and 1 week into another 6-week lockdown. And I think we should just pause and give thanks to the fact that we in this country have thus far escaped an outcome like that. I did use the word thus far, because in a world where this pandemic is continuing to increase, we'll be incredibly lucky and have to be incredibly well managed to avoid further outbreaks of COVID-19. And the thing that probably keeps us all awake at night, if it's not the drought, it's the thought of what would happen to our city if we had to lock down again. And when we look at this budget, it's an emergency budget in response to the COVID-19 situation, but it's also got to be a budget that leaves enough resilience for us to deal with things that we're not expecting. Now, we maybe are getting used to the unexpected arriving on our table. Last year, it was CRL, finding $500 million, and we kind of patted ourselves on the back collectively and said we got through that. We pulled the money together. We didn't have to do anything too dramatic, and we met the future-proofing needs and the contingency needs of that really important project. This year, it's another $500 million, just under now, thanks to the improvement in conditions with coming back to level 1 more quickly. But finding another $500 million on top of all of the things that we did last year is really challenging. But wait, there's more. We've just had a 1 in 200 year drought. Doesn't absolutely look like it when you look out the window and you see the rain coming down. May that keep happening. But what we've had, even in the short time since we put this budget out to consultation, is the financial demand of another $239 million in expenditure, mainly capital, but with 15 million OPEX in there, in order to increase the water supply for our city to stop severe water restrictions having to be implemented over our summer. It might be raining now, but the Met Service forecast is for a dry summer and a dry spring. So 239 million that when we went out to talk to the people we serve in this city that we hadn't incorporated in our budget, we'd noted the risk element there, but that we have to find on top of that. So what we're doing today is meeting a combined demand on resources of $750 million. And that makes this budget the biggest challenge, I think, that any Auckland council has ever had to face. But we don't control the weather, and we certainly didn't control the emergence of COVID-19. Our task was to rise to the challenge that this presented to us, not to dodge it, not to look for the soft options, there are no soft options left, but to get on, tackle that challenge, and look at the options and the combination of options that would enable us to meet that challenge in a way that best serves the people of Auckland who we represent. Now, we did look at all options, and we did look at it collaboratively, and I want to repeat what I said before. Normally a mayoral proposal comes down and that's what you debate around. We've done it a bit differently this year, I think, and it's a better process. Because of the emergency nature of this budget, we worked collectively together, not to say, what do we think about this proposal which is seen to be the outcome, but how do we get to the end point, and how can we share the ownership of this challenge, and how can we work to get the best deal from the collective experience, wisdom and efforts of all of us. And again, I really want to acknowledge the effort that everybody around this table has made. I think it's been superb. The staff for their professionalism, the elected representatives, the IMSB. So thank you all for that. And again, most particularly Desley, who's sitting there looking reasonably fresh, but who was up half the night because the temporary roof on her place blew off. So, you've got the budget to deal with, big event, and what happens, you don't get to sleep at night. So, well done, Desley. You're looking fantastic despite that. So what were the guiding principles that we looked at as we tackled these problems? Well, the first principle, and it's kind of the fundamental one, is to responsibly and prudently manage our finances. We bugger up our finances and we look for soft options that aren't there. We're serving nobody's purpose. We need to ensure that at the end of the day, this city is managed well, that it manages its finances prudently, and that we are still, having got through this challenge, resilient for the contingencies that might arise in the future, as you noted the other day, Councillor Walker. The second thing is we needed to keep intact our key services. because that's what the city does. The things that we deliver that our people need and want and value. We can cut around the edges. We can't cut the core things that we need to deliver to our people. Thirdly, we needed to maintain as much investment as we could in building the infrastructure for the future, because this is one phase in a longer challenge that we have, that having underinvested for so long in our infrastructure, we know that resulted in traffic congestion, that it resulted in housing shortages, that it resulted in environmental degradation. We still have to invest in that infrastructure or we'll fall further behind. And actually, maybe the best time to invest in your infrastructure is when you're facing recession, because we create the assets that we need for the future of our city, but we also contribute to moving the economy forward, to getting economic recovery, creating jobs. And jobs is going to be what the next 6 to 12 months will be about. And last but not least, while we take the hard decisions, let's make sure that those hard decisions don't fall most harshly on those who are in our community who are most vulnerable. Now, I want to look at what we've done in tackling the problem we face in light of those principles. Well, the first thing, when you lose revenue, you've got to reduce your spending. And early on in this process, people, not largely around this table, but people said to us, well, the government's borrowing, why don't we just put another couple of $1 billion on our debt? And we know around this table that wasn't a live option. We've borrowed heavily. We've borrowed heavily to create infrastructure. And borrowing for infrastructure is fine, because the benefits of that infrastructure is spread over generations, and therefore the cost can be spread over generations as well. And while we borrowed heavily, we still borrowed prudently. We kept a AA rating with our credit agencies, second only to the Government of New Zealand. But there were constraints. We were close to our debt to revenue ratio. Actually, in this emergency budget, we'll exceed it. The figures are up there. Our threshold is 270. We'll hit 290. Normally, we wouldn't do that. But there is a provision in the Local Government Act that says if it's prudent to borrow to meet your costs and to have a higher expenditure than you have a revenue in an operating sense, then you're able to do it. But you have to do it prudently. We can get away with 290% because it won't stay at that level, and we'll bring it back down probably within a year to 2 years. And the credit rating agencies will look through what we're doing in this budget. They'll see what caused the crisis. They'll see that we've got a credible plan to resolve that, and we'll maintain our credit rating. And that's important for a variety of reasons. One, it's a symbol that we are managing our finances really well. It gives confidence to the people that we serve. Secondly, we can't just go borrowing, usually to meet operational costs, to load it onto a future generation and, the council after next. That's not responsible. But thirdly, if we were to lose 2 notches in our credit rating, that would cost us over a decade. John, I think the figure's over $300 million. And that money that you're paying in higher interest rates because you've got a lower credit rating is money you can't spend on your services and you can't invest in your capital. So borrowing wasn't the simple answer. So we had to look at cutting. And, I know some of you received emails from an organisation whose name I won't dignify, and they say you're just not, you're not being hard enough. We have cut over $200 million out of our spending this year. I think, Ross, that's the figure. $200 million. We laid off 600 of our contingency workers. We are in the process of having to give notice to 500 full-time equivalent permanent jobs in our council. And that's tough. Tougher on the people that are affected by it, but also tough because we know the impact that that has in human terms. But it's something that we know that we have to do, that this organisation has to be smaller, it has to be leaner, it has to be more adaptable, it has to deal with a situation of uncertainty and difficult economic times that we find ourselves in. that same organisation, unmentioned, suggested that we were all getting a pay rise. Well, congratulations to all of you. I didn't notice it in my bank account. In fact, my bank account was about 20% lower than it normally is on a weekly basis, and yours about 10% because you've all taken pay cuts. And I want to thank you for that. But I also want to thank our executive team that have taken cuts at that level. But most particularly, I want to acknowledge the people that were earning over a threshold level. I think we set it at 100,000. More than half of them voluntarily saying we'll take a pay cut because of the circumstances our council and our city is in. They didn't have to do it, they volunteered it. Didn't see a line in the press statement from that organisation acknowledging the sacrifice that our people are making. And I want to acknowledge them here for what they have done. That's really important. If you look at our non-essential spending, our travel budget's about nil at the moment. There's a particular reason for that, but even before this crisis, we'd cut it by 2/3. We have slashed non-essential spending. But the reality is, we've also had to cut some services that we'd rather not. Maybe they weren't absolutely essential, but they were beneficial to the city. And we've had to reduce somewhat our capital in our spending on infrastructure. Now, another piece of advice that I was given from outside of this place was, why don't you just pull back on all of that spending you were going to do on your big infrastructure projects? Well, that could have been an easy way out. Was it the right way out? And my answer to that is absolutely no. These assets, as I said before, that we are creating now will benefit generations of people in our city. We are still playing the catch-up to get the infrastructure in place. But most importantly, if we slammed the brakes on our capital expenditure, we would close down the construction industries that we will rely on in the future when we start to recover from this recession. And we can't afford to do that. You close them down, it's years before they can recover. We're only just getting to the point where we've got the skills there and the materials and the companies set up to go and do the things that we want. It would be economic stupidity to slash that investment. It would be stupid and irresponsible not to contribute to stimulating the economic recovery of our country and creating jobs. I want to touch on the vulnerable in our society. I'm really proud of what this council did during COVID-19 and the lockdown. The food supply that we worked out of Spark Arena, the meals that we provided. Some of us, Kathy, I'm going to give you an advertisement. Here it is. We were at a book launch last night. One of our number is a newly published author. Well done, Kathy. It was written during COVID-19 with her partner and daughter and another. And last night at that book launch, Chris Farrelly from the Auckland City Mission stood up and acknowledged our council for the work that it had done. And for the half dozen of us that were there, that was a proud moment, wasn't it? Really good. You know, we had helped make a difference in people's lives. So again, you know, there's some easy things we could have cut out of the budget, the funding that we put into homelessness. No way. We could have said, look, we'll put on hold the living wage for our cleaners. Could have done that, eh? It's not in place yet. Had a great excuse for not bringing them up to a living wage. But would that have been the right thing to do? Absolutely not. So we have kept in this budget our living wage for our cleaners. We have maintained, and thank you to the IMSB for its input, we have maintained our commitment to lifting Māori outcomes so that we have a more inclusive and more equitable city, and those things are important. Some other things that could have been cut. We actually put some great things into the initial mayoral proposal to deal with climate change and cutting our emissions, carbon emissions, by 20%. We have retained those because long after COVID becomes a distant memory, we're still meeting that challenge of climate change, and that investment will continue and must continue. Equally with our water quality, you know, we know that we're doing some great things that will make a huge difference for future generations of Aucklanders in improving our water quality, and we'll keep doing those things. So in order to keep services intact, in order to keep on investing in that infrastructure, in order to be inclusive, in order to plan for the future, I am proposing in this budget proposal a 3.5% rate increase. Now, that is not something I've dragged out of the air. That's something that I've listened to all of you around this table. Get your views, listen to all of our local boards. We had, and he's here somewhere, Andy at the back, one of our senior local board people, who's the chair of a local board, say that this was the first time in his memory he could remember every local board endorsing a common rate increase, and it was 3.5%. Every local board, whether it was the east of Auckland, the north of Auckland, the west or the south, every board endorsed that because they understood that while it's nice to have a lower rate increase, we'd all like to be nice and create a lower rate increase, the damage that would do to the services that we provided to our people would outweigh the benefit of the 47 cents a week extra that the 3.5% rate increase means to an owner of a $1 million property. The difference between the 2.5% and the 3.5% is 47 cents a week. But what was the difference for council? The difference for council was slashing our expenditure on infrastructure by 60 million, slashing our spending by another 17 million. And when you've trimmed off all the fat, as I believe that we've done, then you start cutting into the muscle and the bone, and that damage is permanent. Now, not blaming Bernard, but the headline in the paper this morning was rate shock, big rate rise. Andrew Duncan's here somewhere. I think Councillor Mulholland, you asked him to prepare what the comparative rate increases were for cities that we might compare ourselves with. These are largely proposed rather than actual at the moment, but let me just read through them. Hamilton, 3.8. Tauranga, 4.7. Wellington, somewhere between 2.3 and 5.1. Christchurch, somewhere between 3.5 and 5.5. Dunedin, that's actually struck its rate, 4.1. Well, there's a lot of shock in those figures. I don't believe this is a rate shock. I campaigned in the recent election on a 3.5% rate increase against a candidate that was proposing a rates freeze. We put in our long-term budget, our 10-year budget long-term plan, a 3.5% rate increase after all the work that went into that process back in 2018. And we are working on professional advice from people that say at 2.5%, you will do some real damage to the ability of the council to fulfil its role. I think the arguments are overwhelming, and I thank people around this table for reaching what I believe is close to a consensus, not a full consensus, but close to a consensus, that we have to do what is right rather than do what is easy. There are other things we're doing, and I'm just winding up on this now, Madam Chair. I won't take the full hour that you offered me.
Good long 5 minutes, Your Worship. I'll give you that. Keep going.
We'll be selling our surplus properties, and a surplus property is not an asset because it's a property that you don't need now and you haven't defined a need for in the future, and it's actually costing you money both to maintain, but it's more importantly costing you an opportunity costs that you can't invest the capital you get from that into a capital project that we need. I wanted to acknowledge the last thing that was on the slides. The government has provided some assistance. 98 million of that won't help our budget, but will help our city because it's $98 million in capital projects that we actually asked for but hadn't budgeted for. The 98 million that we had budgeted for, that will help us. And while I've got the bare recommendations in the mayoral proposal, the chair will move some updating recommendations that will become part of the mayoral proposal that will acknowledge that there's some good things that we can do with that money that has been freed up, including putting $40 million back into road safety. Things like dangerous intersections where we can save lives and we can stop injuries, and that's important. And it will stop us having to cut another 32 million out of the capital program, even for the 3.5% rate increase. So, winding up, this is a tough budget. We've probably never faced a tougher one. And I want to thank everybody here for constructively and collaboratively working to find a solution to the challenges that are posed. Working together, our community and our country was able to effectively constrain the spread of COVID-19 in a way very few countries in the world have achieved. And working together, we will emerge from this stronger, building a better, more resilient and more inclusive city. Thank you very much.
Kia ora. You're now going to hand over to me, aren't you?
I'm sorry. I'm going to now hand over to the Chair, who will move the Chair's recommendations, picking up the discussions we had yesterday and which will be incorporated into the mayoral proposal. Thank you very much, Desley, and thank you once again for your huge efforts in all of this.
Thank you, thank you. So I would like to put up some recommendations in place of the Mayor's recommendations B5, and they are as follows. To include additional budgets for water care in 2021 of 224 million capital expenditure and 15 million of operational expenditure to respond to Auckland's drought situation, noting that water care will mitigate 121 million of the impact this will have on the group debt. All right, so that is my first recommendation. Drought relief isn't unavoidable, unfortunately, so that's the extra cost we have there. The second one is updating revenue and funding projections as a consequence of Kotahi fully funding public transport shortfalls from July to December, and confirmation of 98 million of government funding for fully or partially funded transport projects. And in doing so, I want to acknowledge both Auckland Transport and NZTA for their work around that. This, of course, avoids further deferrals of over 30 million under the 3.5 option, and also alleviates pressure on our debt. Next one is including an additional group level budget provision of 98 million of additional transport and Three Waters capital expenditure. That, of course, is a good outcome for Auckland, but no direct improvement to our financial challenge, but still our region will benefit from that money. Next one, D, is noting the 20 million reduction to the budget for 2021 events, including the America's Cup. E, noting the reinstatement of 10 million to decrease the proposed reduction in public transport services. F, increase the target for asset recycling by an additional 20 million. I mean, this is showing strong commitment to managing our debt and a willingness to apply other balance sheet solutions rather than just borrow more. And I'm sure John is very happy about that because it also helps with our credit rating. G, including 40 million of additional Auckland Transport capital expenditure enabled by the 15 million public transport subsidy from Waka Kotahi in 2021 for road safety and death serious injury reductions. I think that's really important. No one wants to take responsibility for that. And that came through strongly in the consultation feedback as well. H is something for local boards. It is including the reinstatement of the 10% that they were going to lose under the original 3.5 rates increase. It's also important because local boards are the public face for our communities. We are losing a lot in grants funding. We are losing a lot in that actual interface between communities. Every local board has a different community, and by helping the local boards with their LDIs, that will ensure that they can react as best that they know for their community. I is noting the removal of the animal shelter consolidation from the list of parent operational savings, but it doesn't change the dollar value. And I acknowledge the work that the Chief Executive and Regulatory will do around that. J is including the reinstatement of 450,000 funding to ensure library hours are not reduced. That is a key, important, essential service almost, isn't it, that Aucklanders value. And when things go tough and you haven't got a job and you need to go somewhere and there's somewhere to hang out, quite often your library is one of the most important things. So we are not looking at cutting those hours. And then finally, new clauses D to H just really acknowledge the huge amount of feedback that we've had from Auckland during this consultation process. It acknowledges and thanks the role of local boards, our council-controlled organisations, Independent Māori Statutory Board, and everyone's collaboration towards the input for our emergency budget. It also notes what we're doing for ourselves, and it notes the over $200 million savings and cost reductions for our group, which includes a reduction of staff members. And it also notes the introduction of the proposed postponement of rates for those impacted by COVID-19. And finally, it's the good news. It's how we go further. It's noting that our group will continue to deliver a capital investment program of over $2.5 billion, which will absolutely be a key ingredient to contributing Auckland's recovery from the impact of the global pandemic.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move those recommendations if you'd second them.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'd be happy to second them. So they've been moved and seconded, ladies and gentlemen, and I think, dare I say it, we may be questioned out. So I would invite you for questions and comments as to the emergency budget. Councillor Whapaina.
Thank you, Chair. I firstly want to apologise for the way I handled yesterday. I want to apologise to all those that were there. I'm doing this publicly and also to yourself. Chair, for me, it is around the process, and I want to go through this process because I've been in council now 17 years and just started off straight on the Manukau City Council, so been through long-term plan, been through annual plan, and this is, when I say the worst plan for us to consider as a result of COVID-19 in those 17 years is not an understatement, because His Worship the Mayor has covered that. So, Chair, I want to firstly cover off on the people I wish to thank. I start with finance. Kevin, to you and to your team, the process that we've just gone through with the emergency budget, I acknowledge the work and the hours that you and the team have done. Because what you have done for me is given me a clear picture in regards to the state we are in, how we can move through all the issues, and to get at the end what is going to be beneficial for our community. You've helped me do that. So I want to acknowledge you. I also want to acknowledge Sandra and Sonia. The reason I do that is because I know that when your team does all the work in those wee hours, somebody needs to do the hard work as well in regards to putting it on Nexus, to get all the emails out to us. To both of you, Sandra and Sonia, I say thank you. Chair, with this particular budget, right through this whole consultation process, I've struggled with the 2.5 and 3.5. To pick up on what His Worship the Mayor said around rate rise, I made this clear during all these workshops that it's not a rate rise. It was identified in 2018 that this year, this annual plan year, was going to be 3.5. We actually went out to consultation and said, we know the situation you're feeling, so we're actually suggesting to you there's an option to have 1% lower than what was identified. We all know what happened to our 21 local boards, 3.5. The senior local board member, and you know, I've just texted him and said, senior means you're really old. And he's texted me back and said, no, it means that I am esteemed. So, Chair, you know, to get that, this is the first time for me as well. in 17 years that the local boards in the day before and the term before that was community boards were consistent. I will be supporting all the recommendations on this agenda item. It is a way forward for us and our community. I want to personally acknowledge for both myself and Councillor Collins, our two local boards in the Manukau ward. I want to acknowledge them, and in particular with the asset sales. I only had to ring them to say, look, there are 5 properties. Councillor Collins rang up Otara Papatoetoe and saying there's 1. What do you want us to sort of advocate? And said, no, we're happy for that to be included in Category A. So I acknowledge our 2 local boards, but I acknowledge all the local boards with the co-governance. The Independent Māori Statutory Board, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. The reason I say that is because during Auckland Council, your votes, your presence has been so important through this last 10 years. So I mihi to you, David, and to the Independent Māori Statutory members since the beginning of this. Chair, my last thanks is to you. This particular process I know, and during our workshops, there was one thing that Councillor Collins highlighted to me yesterday, and that was the comment you made about a workshop that you ended up doing from home and how lonely you were as a result of you with that. He also mentioned the word leadership. I want to confirm that that is exactly what I'm saying to you. It has been your leadership that has brought us to this point. So I want to say thank you to you and to the colleagues that are around the table. Ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Walker. Sorry.
Different people that answer them, and I have signalled these questions in advance. The first question is around what is the budgetary provision by Watercare for the drop in revenue that may well be experienced from an aggressive water conservation strategy and campaign that both Auckland Council and Watercare would engage in. And that revenue hit will hit water and wastewater.
Yes, so I don't have the exact specifics to hand, but the Watercare's revenue from water and wastewater charges is reduced by about 50 million in this budget compared to the pre-COVID levels. That's a combination of conservation and drought, water restrictions and drought, and also less business activity because of the COVID impacts. But overall, it's about a 50 million reduction in water revenue, water and wastewater revenue in this budget.
Okay. So I would hope that we can see some modelling around that as it both goes to revenue and also the impact on capital. The other question I've got, Madam Chair, is around what budgetary provision there is on the part of Auckland Council for a water strategy that we don't have, that we've acknowledged that we need, and implementing that strategy over the coming months so that Auckland Council can deliver. And the context of that is that Auckland Council is one of the largest, if not the largest, consumers of water in the Auckland region. So I want to know that we're putting aside some money for that.
Yeah, Councillor Walker, through the Chair. The strategy team here has got budget provision for that. They're currently working their way through the process, collecting the data information, part of the scoping exercise. You've got workshops with Watercare where they'll be coming on board to have a conversation around their supply and demand knowledge, bringing all that together into a strategy. So it's recognised as a priority, and so the strategy team here will make sure there is budget sufficient to cover that.
And the last question goes to some of the points that the Mayor made, and that is around what budgetary flexibility there is moving forward for unexpected but also perhaps likely events and risks that Council could be exposed to, and they include obviously the drought, storm events, and my understanding from Mr. Tucker is we have very little put aside there for storm events. Risks that we have to face that are on our hazard risk register, and also the possibility of any overruns, heaven forbid, on the city rail link, and other like issues.
Thank you for that question, Councillor. What we have done in this budget is not only look at the immediate challenge of the 500 million that we had to find and then the 239 on top of that, but not to put ourselves in a position where we were so stretched in terms of the debt load on us that anything would have blown us out of the water. And that's the reason why the recommendation is for a 290% and for only 1 year. We have budgeted to deal with that challenge and then bring it back under the 270%. The first shock, even before we've got this budget out, was the need to bring forward expenditure that you've mentioned in terms of water supply resilience. But there's nobody in this room that doesn't believe that that money doesn't have to be spent. We all know that it's absolutely critical. Could have come at any time over the next 5 years and would have been dealt with more comfortably. It chose the worst year to come. That wasn't our fault, but we've dealt with it. So the reason why we are being, I don't use the word conservative on the advice of our Chief Financial Officer, we're being prudent in not saying, hey, it can be easy, we can reduce our rates and reduce our income and worsen our debt situation. That's why we're not going out to say we don't have to take these pretty tough measures to cut our spending. We're doing all of those things, not only to meet the 500 million, but to ensure we've got some resilience left to deal with the contingencies that undoubtedly arise, as you've suggested.
So the quick question around that, it would be fair to say that if we hadn't acted the way we have in terms of the rate increase, our debt situation would be worse and we wouldn't have any cushion.
Absolutely, which is why with all of the levers in front of us, we've tried to operate all of those levers, from cutting our spending to reducing on the edges the investment that we're making in infrastructure, to sale of assets, to maintaining the rate increase that we'd always foreshadowed, as Councillor Filipaina said, way back to 2018. We could have taken an easy solution now that make us feel better or make us look better, only to find that that would be catastrophic as soon as the next contingency arose and we had no room to move to deal with it. So you're absolutely right.
Do you want to make your comment now, Councillor?
I'll take my comment.
Okay. This is comments and questions. Do you want me to come back to you?
I'd still rather come back.
Okay.
I'm still reflecting on that.
Okay, on the Mayor's answers. Right, thank you. Deputy Chair.
Thank you. Aroha mai, I get a bit emotional sometimes with these kind of big discussions like this, so thanks for your forbearance in advance. I just want to first of all thank the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor, all of our councillors here, our council colleagues. I want to thank all of our local boards and all of our staff here. It's true that success has many fathers, and there's a hell of a lot of work that's gone into this, and I want to acknowledge you for your service to this city. My particular thank you to Desley Simpson, our Chair. Your strong and steady leadership through these times unprecedented for our city, the unimaginable pressures you must have been under. Well, I'm proud to be your deputy, and thank you for all your work. We need to briefly reflect on why we're here. So coronavirus is still raging across the world, and I want to thank the government for their management of this situation to allow us to have these kind of discussions. New York City had a milestone on Saturday. For the first time since the 11th of March, they didn't have a resident die. Wow. And I want to acknowledge the Te Anatu residents that have passed on in this period as well of corona. Sorry. I want to thank the 5,000 West Auckland residents that submitted on this budget. One in particular that resonated with me, and this was the real emotional part for me, was a solo mum with 2 kids. And she was begging for us to vote for 3.5 to keep those services. I was reminded of being a kid doing it tough in Te Atatu. How I relied on the libraries, sports parks, all the rest of those public services to get me through, and that's what got me here today. I'm proud to say today that a majority of Waitakere residents agreed with that sentiment through this consultation, and thank you. And indeed, thank you to everyone that submitted. I'll be supporting 3.5 today, supporting these library hours being saved, and that's a fantastic achievement. I want to support the local boards that deliver services on the front lines that change lives, and that's fantastic as well. I want to thank you again for your vote for the Henderson bid targeted rate. You've changed lives today in Henderson and my ward, so thank you for that, colleagues. I want to thank the Mayor and Councillors for supporting previous commitments on climate change, previous commitments on Māori outcomes and a living wage for our cleaners. That will change lives as well. My community asked me to advocate for the Henderson Animal Shelter, and I'm proud to see under I that that's being included as well. I wanted to finish quickly by showing everyone my taonga that was given me on my first day during the inauguration. Now, this was actually blessed by a kaumātua and given the meaning of courage. It's taken courage for all of us to get here, and it's something that I've been holding in a lot of these votes and discussions as the months have gone by. And I'll acknowledge everyone for their courage to get to this point today. Thanks, everyone. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, and I'm going to save my comments about you till a bit later.
Should I be worried?
Councillor Fletcher, can you hear us?
Madam Chair, I can hear you, and can I just reiterate, I put it in my comments on the side, but I want only to ask a couple of questions at this point, and I'd like to reserve my right to speak. Is that
That's fine,
acceptable?
Councillor. Absolutely.
Thank you. I mean, the Mayor's scoped a number of these problems, and we've sat through a lot of workshops, and I want to congratulate you for those and for pulling people together. But the reality is that workshops are confidential, and as a consequence, there are some issues that I just want to trace back, because while there have been a lot of emails that have been going backwards and forwards, some from organisations, some just individual emails, I think that there is a little bit of misunderstanding over some of the background to the issues that we're confronted with. And in many ways, the mahi is just starting, because we are, as you have pointed out correctly on a number of occasions, we're really just beginning the process of the LTP now. So this is a holding position, and we start work all over again. So the first question that I want to put to officers is, can they confirm that Watercare is self-funding and fully funded in their 10-year funding plan, including the allowance for events like the current drought, and that their balance sheet has sufficient capacity to take on more debt? In that situation, can they confirm that, firstly? And the second part to the question will be that the main reason that we are having a discussion about debt levels has been the reason that council has been using operational OPEX, using debt for that, and in particular for the depreciation. So I just want my constituents, and I will defend the fact that the council has been making a very serious attempt at cutting back on costs and trying to really look at prioritisation. But I do want my constituents, because everyone's out there blaming Watercare at the moment, almost gleefully, and maybe there are issues around executive salaries that we need to address at some stage, but I go back to the Auckland Transition Authority, who got us off to a very bad start. But I want to come back to this understanding around Watercare and what its current situation is in terms of self-funding. If the officers could speak to that, please.
Right, thank you, Councillor. I'm going to, you're going to have a bit of a joint response, but I'm going to start with Ross.
Okay, cool.
Would you like me to change that? I have the chair's right to change your mind.
I think you might. I'm happy to start. John, Kevin might be able to add more value, but So I guess in terms of, yes, so over the long term, water care is self-funding. So ultimately, when they invest in infrastructure, there's borrowing, there's money borrowed, and it's ultimately repaid over time through water charges. The problem we face is that they're not a separate standalone entity. They are part of the council group. They're 100% owned. So when we look at the Auckland Council Group's balance sheet, it's one single balance sheet. It's not separate organisations, separate balance sheet, it's one combined balance sheet. So while over the long term, water care is self-funding, in the short term, their debt impacts the overall debt. And that's the problem that we're facing. But I guess I'll pass over to Kevin to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, I'll just add a couple of comments. The first is that debt is used to fund infrastructure, and so as Ross says, the debt actually appears on one group balance sheet. In any normal year, if significant infrastructure is to be built, first we'll cover it out of any grants we get from central government or someone else. We'll fund it out of any development contributions, or in Watercare's case, it's infrastructure growth charges. But after that, ultimately, to ensure those that are gaining the benefit from an asset are paying for it over time, we will use debt to fund that. So this is not unusual in that it actually hits the council group's balance sheet to fund significant infrastructure. The difference this year is that our debt parameters are being stretched, so that's why the conversation has been had about how much impact it is having on council group debt at the moment. Look, the other comment I'll just make is there was a passing reference to salaries and things, just to remind people here, although the group is treated in one case as far as things like balance sheet and debt levels go, they are separate legal entities. Council does set objectives to be achieved and does have conversations around budget levels and things, but ultimately Watercare will determine, the Watercare board will determine own salaries and other factors like that as from an administrative management perspective within their own entity.
Thank you for that clarification about that, and that applies to other CCOs as well. So just coming back then to the issue of debt and debt on the council family balance sheet, have any officers or our CEO, have they lobbied central government at any stage to bring about a change in order that we don't end up in that situation where that debt is going to sit within the council family? And I really appreciate you taking a minute or two to outline this for those who are listening, because I think it's a really important point.
I'm going to ask the Mayor to respond.
Councillor Fletcher, yes, I've had those discussions with government, and we are exploring with government the ability of government to move the debt off council's balance sheet but leaving the ownership with council. And there are a variety of ways in which that might be done, including through the use of special purpose vehicles. There is also shortly under consideration the government's plans to reform the whole water structure of New Zealand, and there's been announcements made already totalling about $761 million of government funding going into that. But I think that the government will be of a mind if the water authorities are cooperative with the plans to consolidate the way in which water supplies are delivered, to provide funding to ease that transition into a new model, and it may be that we can benefit from that. But clearly, if we were able to take Watercare's debt off our books, Watercare's debt, I think, is in excess of 1 billion, 1.2 billion. John, can I ask you for clarification of that? Might be higher than that.
It's now about 1.9 billion. 1.9.
It just went up by another 224 million, actually. Yeah, clearly that would help us, Councillor, and those discussions I'm having with the relevant ministers, including the Minister for Internal Affairs.
Thank you for that. So when we come back to this vexed issue of what the debt ceiling might be and how credit rating agencies might respond to us, has there been discussion with the credit rating agencies, and this is probably one more for John or our former CEO, what discussions, because as I understand credit rating agencies, they are really trying to understand, because we're this is not just, as we discussed at length yesterday, we're not just looking at 1 year, we're looking at multi-years. Do they appreciate the situation with the requirements around having water care debt on our books? Do they understand that? Because the big challenge for councillors today will be, you know, is this the rainy day? Is this the time that we use that lever? Or are we trying to keep a little capacity there for those of us who subscribe to the doomsday is yet to come? What I want to know is what kind of attempt have our officers made to inform our credit rating agencies of the situation that council finds itself in?
John.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fitchner, through you, Chair. Look, we have very regular dialogue with both our rating agencies, so both S&P Global and Moody's, on a weekly, if not 2 weekly basis at the moment. And look, they're very well aware of council's current issues around debt, as the wider council sector is facing. What they won't do is manage our balance sheet for us. They will respond to information that we give them, such as what was in the consultation document and what finally gets approved in this annual plan. You know, what's become clear from discussions is that we always knew that 270% debt to revenue was a safe harbour. We know once we get to 290, for example, that Moody's thought that was close enough to put in question the rating, that they went to credit rating committee where they formally reviewed our rating, and fortunately they came back and reaffirmed in their terms our AA2 rating. But what is apparent is that every 1% we move above current levels, we do put our credit rating at risk. So a risk that we will get a downgrade of 1 or more notches. Look, longer term, again, as the Mayor has outlined, they're aware of us. We'd like to get water care debt off our balance sheet. It's complicated. We will do a lot more work leading into the next long-term plan with both S&P and Moody's, working through some credit rating scenarios, including different debt to revenue levels, to try and understand how they would look at it from a credit rating point of view. But those things take time and money, and you're looking at a sort of 3 to 6 month process.
Thank you for that, John. Can you confirm that the 270 limit has been supported in the past because of the propensity of council to fund operations, use debt for operations? Has that been a factor? I just, I think all of us are wanting to see capital projects get off the ground and infrastructure that is long overdue for Auckland, but it's just how we use debt. So I would just like a bit of a breakdown on what we have done up until now, and then know that we can actually have this debate in a more meaningful way going forward into the LTP.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Look, Councillor Fletcher, that's a very good question. There's a lot of factors which underpin our rating, our strong AA rating, not just the debt to revenue figure. Part of it is the local government framework under which we operate in New Zealand, and they give that, again, top marks because it's conservative, it's prudent. And one of those aspects in which it is prudent is that in normal circumstances, we don't use debt to fund operational expenditure, we just use it to fund capital expenditure. However, they accept in one-off situations, extreme situations like we're facing now, and for a limited time, that we would use a modest amount of debt to cover some operating costs.
So you are saying that prior to now, and looking forward with this budget, you have never funded operations through the use of debt?
Look, through you, Chair, I cannot say never, I haven't been around long enough for that, but the general principle, especially on a planning basis, is that we only use debt to fund capital expenditure in normal times. Certainly if we got into the habit of using debt to fund operational costs, on an ongoing and regular basis, we wouldn't have the same AA rating.
I guess just to...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll come back with some comments a bit later on, but thank you for those responses, John.
Just briefly clarify, so our revenue and financing policy sets out what we can and can't use debt to fund. There are some limited exceptions, mainly for grants. So if it's not our capital expenditure, but there's an operating expenditure to give money to another organisation for them to invest in CapEx, that's probably one of the key exceptions. So it is by and large just not normally debt only for capital expenditure, but a few prudent exceptions.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, fellow councillors. It's a bit of a special day, quite frankly, because we've been through as a nation and as a city, as communities and as individuals, something we've never experienced before, and it's been a massive challenge for all of us. And as a Kiwi, you actually hold your head up pretty high and say, we've done jolly well. Well done, New Zealand, well done, Auckland, well done, every community in this country and in this city. Des, I'd like to acknowledge the way that you have pulled this budget together. Your leadership has been exemplary in difficult, challenging times, and I'm sorry about your roof on your house from last night's storm. That was really just grossly unfair. You have done a great job, and the way you've brought the local boards in for a collaborative sessions has been very clever, very wise, and well done. I think we all agree with that. Mr. Mayor, thank you for your leadership, and we really appreciate your leadership in these difficult times. When we were at home during the COVID lockdown, you came in virtually every day here to look at the city that you are responsible for, to work with the people, to work with organisations, to help with the food manufacturing for those people who needed the packages. And I think as a city, we should acknowledge the work that you did along that time and the leadership that you presented to the city. So thank you for that. I'd like to also mention our financial team and all the council staff. Kevin, your leadership and with the Financial Brains Trust, thank you. This stuff has moved literally daily, and it's challenging, and you've delivered it to us in clear, concise, and accurate measures, as best you could, given the changing circumstances. So thank you for that. And to all our council staff who pitched in and helped with food parcel deliveries, who pitched in and answered, 130,000 phone calls out to people who were in need or alone. Well, that was our library staff, I believe. And people doing all sorts of things just in their own communities, helping out. And it's heartwarming, and it shows what a great nation we have and a great city we have. So thank you to all our staff who participated in those efforts. As councillors, we've been presented by this team with all the data and all the scenarios that they could think of. We've also put forward as individuals some ideas, some concepts and some challenges to them, say, what about this, how about that? I know I've done that, and we all have contributed in some ways, and I acknowledge John Watson for the work he's done around the asset recycling bit, and that's important work. So we've all had a crack at it. There's been comprehensive, full and complete access to all the information that council holds. It might not have come in paper form, but it's been available online, digitally. This is just the summary documents, and I was naughty enough to print them out as I've gone along, just so I can keep a record of what is going to be an historical budget. The complexities of this council as a business are well understood by us all. Not down to its minute detail, because that's not our role. We are governors. We're here to set policy and strategic direction. We're not here to say how high you mow the lawns, or how clean you scrub that building, or how much chip you put in the tar seal mix. That's not our role. Our role is to provide strategic direction and overall governance. There are financial interdependencies. You can't put chip on a road without putting white paint on afterwards. You can't do a footpath without doing the access ways. You can't do a sports field without the sports lines. And the list goes on and on and on. You can't just pull one bit of string without bringing the whole ball and mess towards you. And it is complicated. And we need, again, retain that height helicopter view of the governance oversight. The relationship with the government is absolutely critical. And I don't care what colour tie you wear. The Crown has a huge role to play with us. And that relationship is absolutely critical. And one of the challenges we have is the Crown does a year-by-year budget and we have a 10-year plan. And Madam Chair, you know this as well as I do. And that makes life for us really difficult because we might have projects that take 3 or 4 years and we're waiting for funding certainty from the government on a year-by-year basis. And that's something not only Auckland faces, but every growth city and council in this country faces. That's something that needs to be solved. But I also recognise the announcements that have been made by the government. The Infrastructure Up program delivered a serious amount of cash for Auckland projects that it required much needed time. And we have to acknowledge them for that. And more recently is the shovel-ready work. Although we don't have details of what exactly each project is, we have the rough order number, which is helpful. Thick end of 200 million. These financial presents from the Crown also come with interdependencies. There are other roads that connect to Crown-funded roads. There are other pieces of infrastructure required for the capital inputs. So they come with a cost as well. But that's not saying we don't welcome the largesse of the government, but we also want them to understand that it's not free largesse from our point of view. It comes with a cost that we have to bear as a city, as individuals, and as people who fund this city. All of this has made our budget very fluid, and I compliment you councillors and local board members on your ability to move with the fluidity of the situation which we're in. That's been critical. And I had a whole one of these books filled up with figures, and they were just literally changing every second day. And I went through some of them last night, looking at it, and it tells quite an amazing story with the percentage points that are moving and the millions of dollars that are moving around. And then, of course, we had the drought response, which we weren't expecting. And that really didn't leave us with a lot of choice. But by passing this budget today, and I certainly hope that we do, and I'd like to think we'd try and do it unanimously, we're keeping our community facilities up and going as best we can. Most of them at full noise. Kathy's library amendment has helped to achieve in the library space. We will be maintaining our city, towns, villages, areas to the best that we can under these constrained budget times. But I think most importantly, we keep our capital program pretty much up to where it was set. And that's absolutely critical, not only for keeping Auckland moving forward, for allowing our increasing population, for catching up on deficit investment in the past by legacy councils, but also creating employment in the private sector through the civil contracting people, through the engineers and through the asset maintenance industries. This is critical work at a critical time, and we are playing our part in that by making some tough calls that might not be popular in some sectors. None of it has been easy. We've had to shed staff. And as an employer, it's a terrible thing when you have to lay someone off. I've always dreaded it. Luckily, I haven't had to do it too often in private sector work. But we've had to shed large numbers. And it's a tragedy for this council, but it's an even bigger tragedy for those poor individuals. And I thank them for their sacrifice and for their bravery, because that is really difficult times for them, and I wish them all the best. We have a constrained budget with additional savings of $200 million for this 2021 year. This is the emergency budget of 2020-21. Next is the 10-year recovery budget, 2021 to 31. That will be equally challenging, but equally forward-looking, which is why I'd love to see that word recovery put in there, Madam Chair. Again, thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, fellow councillors. And thank you, local board members. And thank you, Auckland. You mightn't all agree with us, but we try and give you accurate, fulsome and wholesome information so that you can make your individual decisions based upon the facts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, what an extraordinary and challenging time this has been for us all of us, perhaps particularly the newbies. It's been a steep learning curve. I'd just like to echo what the Deputy Mayor has said, and yourself and Shane, and thank Kevin and the Brains Trust and the support crews who become more and more silhouetted as the day goes on and the sun starts to set. Thank you all, and to the comms team. Particularly, I'd like to thank the CCOs for doing their bit. And when you told them to go away and try harder, they did. And they've been critical to this. And you know, we're all going to continue to pivot, aren't we, and pull the levers and get those pistons firing in unison. That's not going to change. And they'll be right alongside us. But, I guess what it affirms for me is that there needs to be that closer oversight of the governing body with the CCOs. Your Worship, I've got two things I'd like to thank you for today. The first is your leadership of the drought situation. For the conversations that you've held with Waikato Tainui and the various councils down there, Watercare, and fronting the media on our behalf. And I know you've had the Deputy Mayor alongside you as well. But, importantly, it's the questions of accountability that you asked Watercare here in the confidential workshops. They were really important, they were an insight to me, and again, it affirms for me the importance of that CCO review committee and the role that we can play in the oversight and togetherness, perhaps, alongside our CCOs. Secondly, I want to thank you for providing that balancing item so we could retain the LDI. It's really, really important. I'm glad that that has happened. Thank you to Madam Chair for the support of that. Local boards carry the equal governance role as we do, but at that local level. And they are about to experience their ABS budgets being slashed. No, there is no doubt about it. The impacts are going to be hard, even under 3.5%. So we heard from the Minirewa Local Deputy Chair last week or this week, and she asked that we please provide them with or enable them to have some dignity, allow their community to get through the emergency budget with some dignity. And providing that LDI, it does that. And I thought, just like Shane, Shane brought a bit of a human element to his korero before, and a few examples that I'd just like to share of what a difference it would make. Local board budgets are very interesting, and Councillor Walker, I think you'd really enjoy them because you get to go line by line. By line by line. And it's an interesting space to be because there's actually about 6 different budgets now. Well, I don't know. And my esteemed colleague behind me, I think, nearly Councillor Baker, Chair Baker, has the same experience as I have in terms of years probably of working those budgets, so you know exactly what happens, but what they can do. Retention of the LDI, and I'll speak about the Minirewa Local Board, means that our gold card holders and those with disabilities can continue to exercise in our pools for free. That money that provides that service goes straight to the ops budget. It's not going out anywhere, it's supporting the regional budget to provide operational income. We've got the ability to retain 2 jobs for local young people in our skate parks. So for Randwick and Clendon, arguably 2 of the poorest communities within Auckland, they have 2 part-time skate park guardians, local young people, who make those skate parks free of gangs, free of broken bottles, free of graffiti. That budget that supports that is from LDI, and that too goes back through the regional budget through active recreation. In a partnership with the Business Association and United Taxis, there is a shuttle that provides a service for our housing for our elderly people, so they can connect with each other, they can connect with other retirement villages, and they can go and get medical services, and they can go and support our town centres. It takes them out of isolation and it keeps them together in companionship. Those are 3 small examples of what a difference LDI makes, and it will be the same for every local board, and they will do it differently. But that is why I was very adamant that we need to try and retain that, because I know what's going to happen with the ABS budgets. I know what will happen, and it's going to be tough out there. So thank you. I really appreciate that there was the ability to get a balancing item for that to be retained. It does provide the local boards with choice, and those service impacts will help with dignity. So you have my support for your mayoral proposal, inclusive of the Chair's recommendations. Councillor Simpson, thank you for your leadership of this process. You've done this with integrity, transparency, discipline and compassion. I've governed alongside you in various roles for about 10 years now, and you have maintained all of those attributes. You have been consistent in an inclusive approach, always. What I like about you is that whenever you're raising a problem, you will always bring a solution. And you'll say, I've got a solution to this problem. Might not be the right one, but I've got a solution. That is a really good work ethic, and I have learnt a lot from you. So thank you. You have provided us with a safe environment. That's really important in an environment like this. You've provided us with a safe environment to be able to have free and frank conversations and debates. You have brought dignity and integrity to the process. And it's the first time since I've been in local government that I have seen such an inclusion of the local board chairs from the get-go, and that has made an incredible difference to the outcome that we are sitting with today. So well done. I hope to see that more and more on other committees as well in the governing body. So thank you for your proposal to support the greater investment in the DSI, another item that everybody will support, and the local boards brought to the table too, and again for the retention of the LDI. Thank you. Oh, and thank you to my colleagues. I've learnt a lot. I've learnt a lot about each of you, and a lot about the process. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, thank you, Angela. Really appreciate that. Greg, sorry, Councillor Sayers. Yeah. Sorry, I've been doing this sort of every day.
Not too much longer. Very good. So, look, I don't have any questions, Madam Chair. I'll make my comments now. Thank you. We did have a lot of submissions, and I heard the comment about, the Herald headline. But, equally, I think the headline that Auckland has backed a rate increase was equally perhaps interpretable. If we lumped the 2.5% rate increases with the ones that want more than 2.5%, it came up to about 57% of Auckland. If we took the same data and ring-fenced the 2.5% and less than 2.5%, it came to 64% of people. When I do that in my ward, ring the 2.5% and less, it comes to 75% of my constituents. So I think the message in there was that they're really saying, we want Auckland Council to cut its cloth to fit its income, but at a 2.5% or less income. That was the messaging. And there's also the comments about to do that instead of increasing the burden on ratepayers at a time when households can least afford it. And to recognise the financial hardship people have got to not only pay their rates, but pay their council fees, their fuel tax, 2 targeted rates. In my ward, there's 3, ongoing separate water charges, etc. So increasing taxes such as rates at a time of recession only deepens a recession. And I think that's the wrong thing to be doing. It's the compounding effect on Aucklanders, particularly the most vulnerable, the poor, the superannuants, those on fixed incomes, that steer me away from the 3.5% rate increase. Rate increases get added on to rents, and that makes housing more unaffordable. And the rates relief package may well suit landlords, but I doubt if it's going to suit renters. And there will be a lucky few inside the council family that get lifted to the living wage, but we're not talking about all of Auckland. So as long as Auckland Council keeps carrying this debt of the CRL, I don't think we're really ever going to get our head above water and be able to overly prudently manage our debt ratios. It is an election year. My mind is getting the CRL off Auckland Council's books is our Waterloo moment in history. It would bail Auckland out of our financial hole and also have change to spare. Also, you know, it was just released, I don't know if everyone's seen it, from a consultancy firm, CPR Consultants, which is available to all the councils, looking at the payrolls of 130 councils throughout Auckland. And its conclusion is that councils pay 30% above the private sector. And most Aucklanders would assume that councils pay less than the private sector. So worth having a look through that. And maybe from that data, we might be able to look at those over 100,000 K. And, you know, on the back of an envelope, you could work out that if they were brought back to the private sector, that could be $100 million per annum in savings to ratepayers. And that returns us to the Royal Commissioner's recommendation of having an independent performance auditor residing over Auckland Council. They would be charged with the duty of independent advice and assurances to the public that the Auckland Council is providing high quality service in a cost effective way. So look, the Rodney Local Board supported a 3.5% rate increase, but there was conditional on, as they mentioned to us in person as well, on getting a larger seal extension budget. That hasn't happened. So I think there's a disservice being done to all Aucklanders here. It's a bigger picture because of the disservice that's been done to our rural community. The city's ability to work through COVID-19 was heavily dependent on our rural workforce, who were essential workers to feed us and keep us alive. And our rural-based economy to lead New Zealand into a stronger position relies on that community's productivity and its ability to improve productivity. And that includes lowering the cost of trucking food to us on unsafe, unsealed roads. You know, better roads also open up more internal tourism opportunities as well. So we have the capital spending up from an average of 1.6 million over the last 5 years to now over 2.5 billion in a recessionary year. But the ceiling of roads has been slashed to virtually nil. So I strongly protest against that foresightedness, and accordingly, Madam Chair, I'd like my vote registered against clause B1 when we come to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. It's pretty hard to do just one because, of course, it comes with a package, but I respect that's what you're saying today. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I just got some questions and I'll comment later on. We haven't had the opportunity to delve into that America's Cup budget. Remember, we had a presentation early on, so I've got some emails that have come in. And I just want to have the staff available for that, please.
I saw him. Oh, is Nick?
Is it Pramod or
Pramod?
Or Nick? So my key question is, I've read the heavily redacted host venue agreement. It's a bit hard to read a document with there's so many black lines through it. But I've read the responsibilities of America's Cup events and Emirates Team New Zealand, and I'm concerned that I'm concerned that we don't attribute any of this additional spend to any of their responsibilities, because I'm seeing, when I reconcile the two documents, Nick, I'm seeing overlaps. And I'm seeing that they have a responsibility for management of the crowd, movement of the public at the venue, safety of public at the venue, all aspects of on-the-water and on-land delivery of the racing events, but not limited to that. It goes on to on-water media areas and on-water spectator areas. And I'm thinking we were told that we needed to spend more on harbour master management, etc. All movement of team boats, media, spectators, etc. It goes on and on about on-water spectator responsibilities, racing and event-related entertainment at the venue, crowd management, it lists all that, and providing for safe access for the venue, establishing and delivering a volunteer program at the venue and I think beyond as well. So there's a lot of things in here that I'm concerned that this additional budget may alleviate some of their responsibilities. So I just want absolute assurance that we're not tipping in the remotest old shekel into supporting any of their responsibilities that we have already coughed up for.
Through you, Madam Chair, I subject to my staff perhaps considering it further, but my understanding is that not 1 cent of council money goes to any of the obligations that are assumed by ACE and ETNZ. So the on-water and within venue costs are costs that they bear. The costs that are on land outside of the venue and on the water are costs that the council faces as the host city. The reason that these are substantial is because, and this wasn't necessarily anticipated at the time the document was signed, is that the race course C is in the middle of the harbour, and that means that Aucklanders will be able to enjoy as spectators the event in a way that's never happened before. So that is why we are faced with some pretty complex costs to manage as the hosts.
Okay, look, it's not the time to go through line by line of the various things in the host venue agreement. I will be tired, but there are some items here that do concern me. So under the agreement, they were responsible for the delivery of a high-standard media centre providing for the needs of international and local journalists, etc. And then when you go to what I saw under the responsibility, under what would fall under that 20 million, is a reference to communications, marketing and engagement, which appears to sort of overlap. So you're saying none of this overlaps at all?
So the media centre is about international broadcasting. The marketing and communications that we have in the budget are about engaging Aucklanders. So that's about Aucklanders knowing what's happening, being able to be part of that.
Okay, because it goes on to say it's about broadcasting to millions of households in more than 100 countries. That's on our document. That's what the media centre is supposed to be doing.
No, the media centre is for international journalists who will come to Auckland for the event and will provide that coverage. The spend for Auckland is for the activities that bring the event alive for Aucklanders and within New Zealand. And to the extent there's an overlap, it's because those international media will be experiencing the event in Auckland, and we want that experience to be something that's shared with the world. So I think conceptually it's quite separate, and my understanding is that nothing that we're doing in any way would contribute to the cost of that international media centre. That is a very discrete cost that the event ACE and ETNZ will bear.
Okay, look, I'll just leave it there, Chair. I'm sure that Nick and his team will be pretty fierce in defending our dollar and ensure that there's not a single bench shekel that goes their way in the future. And I'll reserve my right to speak later.
Right, thank you. I think we'll just leave it there. All right, he seems happy. Right, thank you. Councillor Coombe.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. E te koromatua, tēnā koe. E rangatira mā, e hui mai nei. E te kaupapa o tēnei rā. Kia ora koutou katoa. In speaking in support of the 3.5% package and the resolutions before us, I would like to really start by acknowledging how we find ourselves with a massive hole in council's revenue, and considering for the very first time in council's history an emergency budget. As of yesterday, there were 13.5 million infections of coronavirus around the world and almost 600,000 deaths. And those stats are going to include my mum's older sister who died overnight in South Africa of the virus. And I'm sure many people in this room and our communities have been impacted in many different ways from the virus. Even though here, while the pandemic is raging outside of our borders, we are absolutely in the best possible position that we could be in. It's a situation in terms of going into this budget that we could just never have imagined when we started as a fresh term of council back in November, when the biggest crisis at the time was the Sky City fire. And that seemed like a big one in the scheme of things. Little did we know. But as I mentioned, fortunately in Aotearoa, thanks to impressive leadership that's been informed by science and with our team of 5 million coming together, we are in a very, the best possible situation that we could have hoped for. And the phenomenal lockdown response, I think, really highlighted the best of council and the value of the services and facilities that we provide. We've seen food packages distributed, the vulnerable housed, vital supply lines maintained to the Gulf Islands. It was 15,000 calls were made to seniors at home by our redeployed library staff, and the Deputy Mayor mentioned some of these stats as well. And of course the public transport kept running the whole time for our essential workers. And I found out last night how some of that work is continuing at Councillor Casey's fantastic book launch. I heard that the Central Library now has health facilities that are available for rough sleepers, because they find the library a real place of manaakitanga. And that's only come together because of the partnerships that have been developed through the lockdown, and grown stronger with marae, with community groups and NGOs right across the region. And I felt, reading the submissions, that that valued role of council really does come through. It's been a time of people really feeling very grateful for the support that council's been able to provide. And there is a concern that if we have big cuts, then it's going to have a big impact on Auckland's ability to recover at a very time that we need investment, we need jobs, and we need to build community resilience. And I felt that the feedback has been framed very much along two alternative options. Is this a time that you respond to a crisis with more austerity? And I think that's kind of what Councillor Sayers was saying. Or do you actually invest at this time? And the government's taking it very much an investment approach. And I can totally understand that view that we should cut rates. There is really high anxiety in our communities. It's a really difficult time personally, with difficult circumstances for people, and households are getting hit, the income as a result of COVID, and there are job losses. It is a time of historic inequalities and iwi grievances that aren't being addressed through this budget. And it's also really difficult to explain when you're even on the webinars, and I was pleased to participate in 3, I think, of the 7 webinars that the Deputy Mayor was just so incredible that he was at all of them. But those were a really good way, new way in which we engage with the community. But how do you explain that we're putting up rates at a time when everyone else is cost-cutting and tightening the belts? And this is when there's a part of the story that just doesn't get the headlines, but I really do think that it needs to be highlighted, and that is that we're playing catch-up on infrastructure to match Auckland's growth. And the reason that infrastructure is not there, the reason we still have poo going into the harbour, just to give one example, is because historically we had artificially low rates. The old Auckland City Council used to
cross-subsidise residential rates with business ones to keep them artificially low and push out all the infrastructure investment because, you know, led by our paper of record, there was this constant drum roll that rates had to be kept low, and I think it's really put in place inequalities across generations because of that underinvestment. So that's what we're trying to play catch up, and that's why this is actually a very, as the Mayor highlighted, across all councils, this is not a high rates rise, but I totally understand the pain and why we've received so much feedback that this should be a time when we're actually looking to cut household costs. And in looking at the feedback, you know, I have read and I've heard a lot of anger directed at council, and I understand that there is that lack of trust that we do need to address, and we do need to address that perception that the super city has failed. And I'm very sorry to the staff who've had to read the vitriol that's been in some of the submissions. I've heard it's been the worst levels of really nasty feedback that's ever been experienced in feedback. And a lot of that has been whipped up by a really dishonest campaign based on misinformation. And that does need to be called out because it has led to a lot of nasty abuse. And I would have really liked to have engaged with an honest campaign because I think it's actually been counterproductive. It would have been useful to have got a lot more constructive feedback from people to say, when they shouted us that we should cut pet projects, vanity projects, we should go back to core business, I would like to know what that is. What are these? There are very, very few submissions that actually detailed what these core services are that we should be providing when you look at across the breadth of it. And many of those arguing for a rates freeze or a cut have in the very same feedback asked for a 3.5% package of services and asked council to continue playing that role of improving community wellbeing, of providing a whole range of facilities and services that we know are really valued out there. And that came through very strongly in the local board, giving unanimous support to 3.5%. And in all of that local board feedback, they referred very frequently to our key budget considerations and principles that the Mayor outlined, and in particular, the principle around protecting the most vulnerable, about working to decrease the inequality that we have across our region. And for this reason, I really do support the re-establishment of the local board discretionary budget, what we call the, very confusingly, LDI, which doesn't mean anything public-facing. And thank you, Councillor Dalton, for how much you outlined in terms of what that really can mean to local boards, because they can act nimbly and responsively to community needs, you know, whether it's grants, environmental programs, events, extended hours and programs at valued community facilities. And huge credit to you, Madam Chair, I think rightly deserved the credit that you've received today for bringing all the local boards on the emergency budget journey. Having come, of course, from local board land, I've very much noticed that it's been a really different approach that has made everybody right on aware of the information right from those earliest days when we were all locked away at home in the Zoom meetings or the Skype meetings, talking into the void and thinking no one was there, even though there was 70 people on the line. It's quite incredible to look back on that. So thank you, Madam Chair, for that collaborative co-governance process and for the superb job that you have done. I do put a lot of emphasis on the feedback because it's something I do enjoy as my role, and it probably does reflect my local board background where we do go through those submissions very carefully. And it does need to be acknowledged that there has been a huge effort to collate 34,000 pieces of feedback. And yeah, I can't say I've read every single one, definitely all my ward ones. And I did read all of the ones, I've tried to read everyone from organisations. And acknowledging the huge work, I do just want to emphasise that there is a real gap in that consultation summary because if a submission is received from an organisation, it's actually just lumped together as one bit of feedback. So if we look at what has actually been identified as regional organisations, that is really strong support for a 3.5% package proposal from really diverse groups from across Tamaki Makaurau. Residents associations, faith-based groups, sporting institutions, environmental groups, business associations in my area but right across the region, unions, arts and culture organisations, and they collectively represent hundreds of thousands of members. So I'd like to see, the next time we do, I think that's a bit of work we need to do better on in being able to really bring forward the voices of all those members that belong to those groups. If I do have any misgivings about this budget package, it is in that responding to the emergency, we perhaps haven't really achieved a strategic reset. And there is that tendency to fall back onto business as usual rather than building back better. And that push constantly to think of climate action as sort of something that we can just trade off, that it's sort of a nice to have rather than something that should be just integral to everything that we are doing to avoid a far greater emergency. And I have, of course, found it really frustrating that we are still arguing about cycleway projects that Auckland Transport should have delivered 3 years ago from funds that were announced by John Key when he was Prime Minister, and that now feels like a lifetime ago. But overall, this package is really to be commended, and under very difficult circumstances that it came together. So thank you, Mr Mayor, for including in your proposal protecting the new budget for the Council's greenhouse gas emission initiatives, the living wage and our homeless response, all important things, restoring the library's budget, and I'm really pleased to see the budget for the road safety is there, and the scope for the work program that Auckland has told us can be tweaked on the way through. I'm almost at the end. I do believe that we have a strong mandate for what's before us in these resolutions. So if you take into account all of the feedback, the views of our local boards, all of the excellent financial information that's come to us, thank you to the Brains Trust, and the updated information we've received on the expenditure required to respond to the drought. We have found considerable cuts across the organisation. I won't list all those, but I do just acknowledge that, there's a huge chunk of staff cuts that are already underway, and that's a very difficult time for a lot of people. So I just would like to end on just a wee quote. It is attributed to Joe Biden, who hopefully will be the next president of America, United States of America. But it is something that's said often by city leaders right around the world. Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value. Thank you to everybody for all the hard work, a huge number of people who've brought us this budget to us today. Kia ora koutou katoa.
Kia ora, thank you, Pippa. Councillor Mulholland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to Your Worship and Deputy Mayor. I am also, of course, speaking in support of the package before us. I don't have questions, but I do have a prepared comment. I do acknowledge the IMSB and thank you for your work and your contribution to society and community, and that is important to me, and coming from the mighty Waikato you would know that's important to me. This is a fabulous city. I have lived in the same home for nearly 28 years. I was going to say 38, but I don't think I'm that old. So I also want to acknowledge the submissions locally that I read for my community. And now I shall move to my prepared statement. To me, these are definitely extraordinary times, and I would like to thank every single person involved in this process. But first and foremost, our community. They are our people. people who live in our community, our society. They're the ones that count. So, Councillor Simpson and Chair, Deputy Chair, thank you. Councillor Simpson, your exemplary performance of Chair, it is outstanding and it is a pleasure to work alongside you. To the staff who have supported us and myself in this process, I acknowledge you. To my colleagues around this table, it is a pleasure to work alongside you. And I hope you take that to heart, because each and every one of you know that that is the truth coming from me. I value you, and I value your knowledge and expertise. As I say, it is thanks to the tens of thousands of Aucklanders who shared their views and opinions, and they took the time to give feedback. Now, I will agree that not all of it was pleasant reading, and that weighs on me, because maybe I do, as someone once said, have rose-coloured glasses, although some may not believe that. I'd like to think that we do the right thing. Now, I have been very vocal on supporting a lower rate rise. And my community, in part, told me that we should have a lower rate increase than you see before you. But I stand strong as a wahine, and I say that I must do the right thing, because these are extraordinary times, and we started this process with reducing our revenue. And I think it did add to about a 26% increase you'd have to take if you were going to go back to the original.
28.
Sorry, 28, fabulous. Well, it's not fabulous. Anyway, so, but still I see a path, I did see a path where we could fit within that 2.5%. Savings, recycling, as we've talked about, and we could have spared Aucklanders the pain, and I acknowledge the comments that we've just heard from fellow councillor with regards to those matters. It would have been tight and on a knife edge, and without doubt, but maybe we could have done it. However, in my view, and the view of others I have spoken with, because I don't do this for me, I do this for everyone that I am elected to represent. We've had the pandemic. I have had a family member, just in case anyone doesn't know, also who lost their job and is suffering as a consequence. So we are all affected by this. And then we have the drought. So with regards to that, this is the reason today that I'll be supporting the proposal before us of a 3.5% rates rise. Because to support anything lower than that in these times would cripple the delivery of much needed services and long-awaited infrastructure. And I must acknowledge my community in Avondale that I've mentioned before on the basis of that, and the wider foe, because it is an area that does require that support. Auckland does need to invest to recover, and it is our responsibility to look after the future of Auckland. And I think of that, this is the future of Aucklanders. These are our people. It is a future that we must consider. And the future's not served by leaving critical services and facilities to wither. So ultimately, this is a responsible thing for me to do. Now, last night I received a message from a very wise woman who said to me, in giving advice, and that wasn't someone at this table, it was someone outside of this table, and this person knows me well, and they know I stand for the truth. And she said to me, the truth is the main factor. Go for the truth. The truth of this budget is to put Auckland back on track, to support the economic recovery. And those of you that know me know I'm a fan of economic development and a big supporter of ED. And we are to provide the necessary infrastructure and services for all of our communities, all people, and to provide ratepayers with value for money. So, a 3.5% rates increase is the responsible option, and I shall be taking that. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. I have one question, and you know it's on debt, and then I reserve my right to speak. I guess just one last time, because I've asked it 1,000 times, a lot of the feedback I get is don't put the rates up, don't cut anything, just put it all on debt. Put all the hundreds of millions of dollars
on debt because it's a choice and nothing, you don't really know if you'll get downgraded. Can I just have, for the very last time, what can we borrow? Why can't, we're going 20% over our debt cap, but what happens if we borrowed it all and didn't make these horrible cuts we're having to cut? What is the implications to our budget over time?
Thank you, Chair, and for one last time, let's talk about debt.
Well.
Look, I start off by saying that, credit ratings, they're an art, not a science. We know at 270% debt to revenue, we're safe for the AA rating. We know at 290%, we're getting close to a downgrade. We're probably not there, no guarantees, but we're probably not. What we do know is that every 1% we go above 290, we increase the chance of a credit rating downgrade. Now look, it might not happen at 295, it might not happen at 300, but it might as well. But the further you go, the more likely it's going to happen, and at one time it will. So what does it mean to get a credit rating downgrade? I think as the Mayor outlined, a one-notch downgrade over time, again depending on market conditions, will add about 10 basis points or 0.1% to your borrowing costs. Now that will apply to all new borrowings and as refinancing existing debt. And that again, very approximately, we're talking a one-notch downgrade over a 10-year period where our debt's going to go around about 130 million. A two-notch downgrade, slightly more than double that, again, ballpark estimate around 300 million. So that's the implications of having a credit rating downgrade. Now the other point to make about credit ratings, I've said it's an art, not a science. It's not just where we get to as far as a debt to revenue figure in 1 year. There's more to it than that. Part of it, you're right, is about how far we go above 290. Other elements are how long do we stay at those levels for? How quickly can we return to 270? 1 year, probably okay. 2 years, less certain. 5 years, not that good. Rating agencies will also look at how believable or credible are our plans to get back to 270%. So is the overall package, does it make sense? Are we being conservative? Are we being prudent? And what you're seeing with what's in front of you today, I would say, in my view, is a pretty prudent and sensible package because we're pulling multiple levers. We're pulling the revenue lever and the fact that we're looking at 3.5%, not 2.5%. We're making operational cost savings where we can. We're trimming back on the capital expenditure program, and we're selling assets that we no longer need, and we're pushing debt, but moderately, not too hard. So all in all, you'd say from that, it paints a pretty good picture to rating agencies, and we're most likely going to keep our AA rating. The other point to make, and it's something that the Mayor and Councillor Walker have also addressed, is that the lower we can keep the debt to revenue ratio at the moment, the more we have up our sleeve in case something goes wrong, whatever that might be. So we know at 290%, we've got more left in the tank than we do at 291, 292, etc. And that's pretty important because a lot of this budget we're facing now, it's based on a lot of assumptions and a lot of uncertainty.
Thank you. I'll just
tell you, come tomorrow, I never want to hear the word debt again. Anyway, move on.
Cool. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all good with the debt, and I'll launch into
speak now?
Yes. Okay, well, first of all, this obviously sucks. It really sucks. Like, this is the worst. This is not what we were thinking was going to happen. No one expected this. This is not what we thought we were getting elected to, especially for the new councillors. It's pretty tough. I guess first I just want to do some thank yous like everyone has. Thank you to Aucklanders, for their support for us, whether they oppose or support this budget. That it's big that they've given up their feedback in many different ways. And they also came together over the COVID lockdown period and are still coming together now, supporting locals, supporting each other through probably what's going to be a harder time down the road. Thank you to the Mayor for being our voice during all of this, but also working constantly. Yeah, I don't know how many sunrise pictures you put on Twitter, but you seem to be always, I think you're sleeping here. But thank you to our councillors, our IMSB members, local boards for all coming together. I think this is the first time to me that over the 4 years, almost 4 years, that we've actually felt like a whānau together. I truly feel like we're acting like a whānau. We don't have to agree. Of course, we argue. Our cousin Wayne makes us lighten the mood at the right moments when we've needed it during this time. But I think we've really supported each other. I feel supported, and I know we don't choose our family and we don't choose each other around this table, but I think, you know, what has been pretty tough and intense discussions daily, you know, almost every day for the last couple months, I think we've acted pretty well together over time. I want to thank the staff across Auckland Council and the CCOs for coming together while you're being restructured, while you're losing jobs, seeing colleagues go, your family probably losing jobs and income as well, and dealing with so much uncertainty while you're seeing a lot of hate about council and the media. I want to thank those staff that cooked 400 meals a day for the City Mission and our homeless. Thank our library staff for calling Aucklanders over 65 to check on them, our bus drivers, those preparing food parcels, those picking up rubbish, keeping our streets clean, everyone else who was out there putting themselves at risk while we Skyped in to work every day. Shout out to our CSAs and democracy team and everyone who put everything together for us and putting up with us and dealing with ridiculous phone calls at who knows what time on a whole lot of things. While you're supporting your own families, you know, potentially having kids running around while you're trying to do everything, you know, that's not been easy for many of you. I want to thank, you know, our Deputy Chair and Chair. I want to thank you especially, Desley. You know, we don't agree on everything, but I don't think you've ever criticised my views or comments. You've brought us all together and kept your integrity under intense pressure and scrutiny. And I don't know if you remember, but I met you first when I was 18 years old. We were on our way. There was a youth group of us going to Antarctica. Flights got delayed. It was very awkward. It was very stressful. You came to chaperone us, and you could see we were all upset. And the first thing you said was, "Are you all 18?" And we were like, "Yes." She said, "Right, I'm going to go buy you cocktails. Let's go." and that, from that moment to now, to cool us down and make sure we were 18. So she was made sure she had the facts, but also, you know, made us have a laugh. So you kept that the whole time over the last 18, so 4 years ago or something like that. So, yeah, no, this, you know, all jokes aside, this has been extremely tough. Reading through the submissions, there's pretty tough reading in there, knowing what's going on and trying to do the best for our community and balancing all that up. I was nervous reading the submissions. As Pippa said, some were incredibly nasty, some were hateful, but most of the submissions reflected the best of our community. There were many who selected 2.5. They were worried about their friends and neighbours, themselves, struggling through a lot. They were worried about losing their homes, livelihoods, businesses. But overwhelmingly, the message on 2.5 and 3.5 was that we needed to keep services going, keep as many jobs as we could. There were people who wanted 2.5 that wanted to keep us all the services. That's why I keep asking about debt. You know, there were lots of people. There was one senior resident who wrote, "I've never been in favour of the grand super plans, but keeping basic human services that allow Auckland to protect and serve the people is critical. You can't cut away the heart of public services, such as libraries, sports fields, arts, culture, without cutting the connections of people such as myself. To cut public transport would be to throw away the years of gains recently." The message of connection came over and over again. We want to connect with people. I think lockdown also did that. People realised what was important, and people did not want and do not want us to lag behind. I don't think people want us to leave the problems for the next generations. There was a lot of, please don't go back to the bad old days of no investment in infrastructure. Please keep investing. They don't want us to forget about climate change because there's a pandemic at the same time. To those who swear and abuse us, and you know, those who did send out misleading information and assume we haven't been affected, I think we've all been affected, like we've all said around the table. My dad, he's 64, and He's still on the tools as a floor sander, and I remember on the Monday of the announcement of lockdown, I could tell he'd been crying, he's pretty upset. He just was sort of, what the hell do I do? What, do I just pack up and go home? And I think for the first time, it may have been the first time he's ever not worked 6 days a week in his whole life, especially for that long. And he's lost a lot of income, but he still paid his staff, his worker, 100% as long as he could. Two other family members have lost their jobs in the last couple of weeks, and they've got a baby on the way and little kids, so that's going to be hard too. But I guess the other thing is our business, our rates goes to 9,000 businesses in Auckland. Our 9,000 businesses provide services to council, or we pay 9,000 businesses to employ people to do jobs for us. So the rates paid from Aucklanders goes to Aucklanders. And we know not only those 9,000 businesses are affected. I've talked to some who've already given away 20 jobs and complete offices because they know that the pipeline of works is not coming. Shane Allison said the 200 million or so that's been delayed will mean 1,000 fewer jobs in our community. We have already lost 600 casual jobs, and I know yesterday I got a little bit upset about the jobs around our organisation. It's over, there is a lot of hate out there for council staff, but council join and become council staff because they want to give back to Auckland. And I've talked to staff in the stairwells, in the lifts, in the ever, who think or know their job might be going, and they're still positive because it's for the good of Auckland. There's over 500 of those people that won't have jobs in the next couple of weeks. And that's pretty tough. They're sitting here, maybe some people in this room who literally do the jobs for us. We sit around this table, we get some of the hate, but these people have to go back to their families and say, well, I did a good job on that budget, but actually I don't have a job anymore. So I don't want to vote for people to lose their livelihoods. I don't want to vote for cuts. I don't want to vote for things that are not going to be upgraded, that are already dilapidated. I don't want to cut safety budgets. I don't want to see the Cody dieback not be dealt with, climate change not be dealt with. But we are doing that. We're voting for all those things to happen. So when someone tells us we're not making the hard decisions and we're not cutting, we're actually doing a really, really bad job. We're doing a good job of cutting, but I'm sick to my stomach of what we have to do. But I can't go further. I can't take away 1,000 rubbish bins. I can't close public toilets. I can't stop the mowing. If we go down to 2.5, we know all of those things are going to happen and worse. So 3.5 is a little bit of good and amongst a whole lot of bad. And it's our community and our city that expects us to keep the momentum going. And if 3.5 is the max of that momentum, then that's what we have to support. And I don't think people are going to look back in a year or two's time and said, I wish you cut back further and hurt more people and made the city slow down to a grinding halt and the country. So thank you.
Kia ora, thank you for that. Councillor Casey.
I'll try and keep it short. First of all, fun fact, at the end of this term I'll have done 27 years as a councillor. That's on 3 councils with 6 mayors. That means 27 annual plans. And this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And it is about jobs. It's about our council family being made redundant. People learning this week that the job they thought they had for a long time has been taken away from them. And one of the main thoughts I've had throughout this process, and I'm going to talk about the process shortly, has been to save as many jobs for our workers as we can. And as you've heard from the Mayor, we haven't managed to keep everybody. We lost our casuals first off, 600 of them. And this week, 500 letters, 500 phone calls, 500 face-to-face meetings of staff listening in today who are losing their job. And that's what this is about today for me. It's about the hardest budget ever. Let me talk about the process, because I want to talk about some bright spots in all of this. And I'm going to start with leadership, and I'm going to start with the Mayor. Lockdown was only 3 months ago. And I, along with everybody else in this room, and probably the people listening in, I was petrified. We had no idea what New Zealand and Auckland was about to face. So there were emotions running high. People were frightened. And every day, without fail, I heard from the Mayor, through the media, about what Auckland Council wanted of its public. People needed that. They were looking for reassurance. They were looking for leadership. And Phil, you're a machine. You are. You gave it back in spades. You empowered all of us. And I'm not going to do all the thank yous, there's too many. But the staff gave the messages to us that we needed to put out to our publics. And I actually felt, for the first time ever in 27 years, that this community here worked together to beat COVID. We haven't beat it yet, I agree with you. We need to be vigilant. So that was the first leadership commendation to you, the Mayor. The second is to the dynamic duo of Shane and Desley. You've heard kind of little snippets, if you're listening in, of how difficult this has been. There has been anger, there has been tears shed, there has been great debate. A lot of it done on Skype, and I don't know how you did that, Desley. 70 people on Skype at the one time, and you controlled it beautifully. So, first of all, to Shane, I don't know what kind of happy pills you're on, but can I have some? Can I have some? You are unfailingly good-natured and good-humoured, and it really is a joy. Thank you. Desley, the words that you've heard from your colleagues, I'll just add to. I've got 3. I've written them down in case I forget them. First of all, flair. Flair. You do this job with flair. You do it with confidence, and like your Batman over there, your Robin, you do it with good humour. And you have faced everything that we had to give, and we've come through with a budget that you should be very, very proud of. Thank you so much for what you do. I think, did somebody tell me we had 90 hours clocked up? That's 90 hours of official meetings. I can guarantee you that everybody in this room, you can just double that or triple it. And as for the staff, you've just been living this. But that's the extent. We've been living it, we've been breathing it, people have been talking to us about it. There is no getting away from it. That's what we've been eating and sleeping for the last X months, since that first emergency committee via Skype that we all came into for Desley. The bright spots in this budget, though, for me, lockdown showed us what we need as a city. We need connection. We need people to be connected, and council does that. And when our facilities closed, people realised how important council is in their lives, probably for the first time. And central to that, as we've all recognised with a small gesture to the libraries, is the libraries are an absolute vital community hub. And each board that came in 2 days ago said that to us. Our public always rate the libraries highest in everything we do. They recognise as a council function, we do it so well. Thank you, libraries, you rock. The budget for homelessness is safe in this budget. And we have to solve homelessness. Through lockdown, we managed to get everybody off the street. We can solve the problem of homelessness. So we're doing our part as a ratepayer's contribution to it. It's a solution that has to be with the government. We can't do it alone. So we're doing our part. That budget is safe. The living wage, a promise the Mayor made, he's keeping to the cleaners. The people who clean our toilets in this building earn less than the living wage at the moment. And that, for me, is shocking. We're fixing that. This budget allows that to happen. Thank you. The shelter, I have to mention the shelter, Shane, because I'm with you on that. Through this period when people lose their jobs, lose their homes, animals will suffer because you can't feed your family, you certainly can't feed your animal. There will be more pets found, there'll be more pets locked up. So thank you for giving a year to see what will happen. That's forward thinking. So finally, my thank you is leadership again, and that's to each and every one of my colleagues at the table here, including the independent Morris Statutory Board members and all 21 local boards, because we did it together. We did it together. We did it. So many people have helped. Every single councillor worked with their local boards, and we landed a budget. Well, I hope so. We've landed a budget. So for the first time in 27 years, I congratulate all my colleagues for working collaboratively, for putting the city before self and before politics. It's made my heart big, and that's it. I'll be voting for this budget in spades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Kia ora. Councillor Young.
Through Madam Chair, I would like to start by acknowledging Madam Chair. Sorry, I have a statement here. The way that Councillor Simpson has managed this emerging budget process has brought the councillor and our local boss along the way with her. This is not easy. I would like to acknowledge the local boss and thank them for the carefully and considerate feedback we have received. I will be supporting the chair and all our local boss in the proposed budget and the decision for 3.5 increasing. Throughout this process, I have listened submission of my colleagues and the public feedback with an open mind. Over the past few months, our city has been through a lot. To put it perspective, at the start of the emergency budget, we were still under lockdown. Now we are talking about how we recover our Auckland city. We are lucky, as the mayor just mentioned previously, other cities around the world are still facing fear, uncertainty, and the increase in the numbers of COVID-19 deaths every day. With this in mind, I feel privileged to say my main concern is around losing the progress our city is making. We need to make sure we are in the best possible position to deliver for present and the future Aucklanders after COVID-19. When I was first elected to council table here 19 months ago, I was very surprised at how long it takes to get the new projects going. I feel frustrated at how far behind our infrastructure is. But I'm confident that while there are still many capital project deferrals under these emergent budgets, things could be worse. We have found a good balance. Under a 3.5% rate increase, the East can not only keep the empty Eastern busway, we can also continue the airport to Botany Rapid Transit project. Both these two projects will be the key to link the East to the rest of Auckland. With our fast-growing population, that is top priority. I would find it difficult to support a budget which adds further risk and delay to this. I do regret that a number of local OLEs will be put on hold through this emerging budget. These projects are often long overdue and should have been delivered years ago. As a ward councillor, I'm thinking particularly of the Flatbush Library and Community Center in my ward. This was a Manukau City Council project. With my fellow councillors, I will be pushing hard to make sure this project can be prioritized through our long-term plan. Just quickly, I would also like to make a comment about our engagement. There has been a lot of good work from our staff, and they have done a great job under a lot of pressure. However, as a council, we need to get better at communicating to our Aucklanders. During the public consultation, except arranged by the council, I probably attended more than 10 Chinese Asia community events, interview for our emergency budget. I explained to them our emergency budget and our council challenges situation. I would like to say that more than 80% of the people I spoke to support higher rate once they understand the effect on our service and our recovery. But we cannot speak to everybody. If I was not a councillor, my wife probably would not to support a rate raising without the benefit of many hours of the workshop and expert advice in council. We need to get better at engaging our diverse communities. we need to change our traditional math that turn the people away. This is challenging, but also a great opportunity for us. Finally, I would like to say I will respect the final decision of each of our fellow councillors, IMSB members and the mayor. Regardless of the outcome on the budget, I know that we can all continue to work together to keep Auckland moving. It has been a great privilege. Thank you, Madam Chairs, and everybody who worked on this emerging budget.
Chair, thank you. I'm going to have Councillor Newman, and then we're going to have just a quick break, all right? I'm giving everyone the length of time that they want to say this is important, so bear with us. Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. You've just parked me between everybody and a break. That's very kind.
We'll take as long as we need.
Look, I want to start by thanking Councillor Paul Young, both Councillor Stewart and Councillor Young. You are very good representatives for the Hawakians of East Auckland. Let me be very clear from the start that I will be voting for the budget, including a 3.5% average rate increase. And I want to make that statement, Chair, up front because people need to know what I did, and I am comfortable to be held to account for that decision. I do want to thank people for their feedback. My thanks for every suggestion and comment. My thanks to everybody who has told me how feckless and incompetent I am, bloody useless, and all the other choice words. And that was just from the Deputy Mayor. So thank you, Bill. Look, I want to apologise to the many thousands of Aucklanders who will be disappointed by the decision that I think we're going to take because they wanted something different. For myself, I'm a pretty good wicket in terms of my personal life. I've earned a lot more in my life than I have as a councillor. I think that everybody sitting around this table has actually benefited from the relative security of being elected to this place at this very difficult time. It has provided a degree of security that is not afforded to many of our constituents. I said to Councillor Dalton some months ago that for me, I didn't want to compare the rate increase to the cost of a cup of coffee or a Snickers bar or half a Snickers bar, because I think that comparison is unhelpful. The increase will mean a lot to people, and it does mean a lot to me. Madam Chair, early on I declared my view that the initial budget forecasts were optimistic and they should not be relied upon. The budget scenario that we had early on, that went out the window in a matter of days, didn't it? That's good. I think that the budget situation does justify, austerity is a tough word, but it is the moment. But it doesn't justify civic malfeasance when it comes to local services. I support pulling the levers, which will mean spending less on capital works, cutting operating expenditure, selling assets, and temporarily raising debt. What I don't support is a wholesale annihilation of services. And I have challenged those constituents in my ward who demand that I vote for no or lower rate increases to itemise certain things. Tell me which libraries I should close. Tell me which swimming pools I should close. Which park should no longer be mowed. And my answer to my constituents who want low or no rate increases is that they are not wrong. It is simply a case of my view is that the opportunity cost is too great. You can have no rate increases, but you have to pay for it by having no services. And I want the capacity to renew my roads. I want to be able to complete some really important road safety initiatives in my ward, a very car-centric ward, because there are really dangerous intersections there. Actually, I wouldn't have been too troubled if we'd gone to a formal consultation around a zero rate increase option, because I think that that would have afforded a more confronting debate around the cost of a zero rate option. I want to acknowledge my friend Councillor Sayers from Rodney, and I want to say to you, Councillor Sayers, that I respect your advocacy, but I think that one of the challenges to me in listening to you, and the counter that I would have, is that the income line has to be balanced by the consequential adjustment on the expenditure side of the budget in order to achieve a 2.5% rate increase, and I don't believe that has been done. So for me, I need to complete some drainage works that makes good on the contract commitments and the roading developments. I want to see local boards being able to continue to fund local initiatives. I need to ensure that the animal management contractors will continue to work in my ward, and we will operate the animal management shelter there. And it's not a happy outcome for many of the animals that end up in that shelter. I've never had anyone present to me an alternate budget that pays for a lower or a zero rate increase that actually is able to preserve those services. I haven't seen it. If somebody's got it, let me know. Madam Chair, I think we will be back. I think that I don't believe that this is a one-off. I believe that there are tougher decisions that are going to have to be made moving forward. I foreshadow that I accept that we'll probably have to have a discussion around things like airport shares. I think that we will have to consider issues in relation to some of the PT concessions. However, being a good Catholic, I did read the Catholic Diocese submission to me, and they unhelpfully said that I must defend the provision of increased child fare subsidies, which will help many families in need. So that's a clincher, really, isn't it? Well, they do point out to Councillor Coombe, they then went on to say, and further investment in more and or bigger park and ride parking should continue. So I commend that to you, Councillor Coombe. I think that we are going to have a debate around the future of council-owned gyms. We are competing with the private sector there. I think we need to rationalise stadia in order to avoid the associated renewal costs of the capital liabilities. But, you know, that's a debate, I think, starting next week, isn't it, Chair? Okay, that's good. Look, this is a budget where there are $200 million of cuts, 600 contingency workers, I think, have gone. 500 redundancies are coming. Many of the staff that are affected live in my ward. That's meaningful. So people who want to back a headline cut are free to write to me and give me feedback on my vote, but I would ask them to advise me where the next tranche of cuts will come from, because I haven't seen that to date. But I wait with bated breath for the emails to arrive, but I'm happy to vote for the budget as proposed.
Thank you, Councillor. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a quick 5-minute break. I think you just need